Hi, this is our devotional for week 4 for ENGL225R. And the topic this week is on our minds. I think oftentimes when it comes to faith or when it comes to Christianity, it seems like, at least critics of Christianity, that Christians leave their minds at the door. In other words, there's no engagement or interface with our minds. And I think there's nothing further than the truth than that. Because the use of our minds, the use of our brains is something very important as people of God. In fact, if you remember back to our first week, we looked at the book of Genesis in the Old Testament, chapter 1, verses 26 through 27, where God says, "Let us make man in our image." And the actual word in Hebrew for man is gender inclusive, so it actually means male and female. So what God is really saying, let's create humanity in our image. And in the rest of verse 26 and 27, it talks about that. So really, as we talked about in week 1, one of the definitions of to be human, at least in the view of Genesis chapter 1, 26 through 27, is to be image bearers. The Latin term is imago Dei. And there's many ways that we reflect, we mirror who God is, and as we talked about, creativity is one of them. But another one is the use of our minds, knowledge, cognitive thinking. Because something that's important to God, obviously, is the use of His mind and His knowledge, but also for us as the people of God, that we are to use our minds. In fact, in Deuteronomy chapter 6, in a section of Scripture called the Shema, which is really the center of the Torah, which for a Jewish person is the first 5 books of the Old Testament. It's really the most important teachings and instructions from God in all of the Old Testament or the Hebrew Scriptures. But in Deuteronomy chapter 6, God says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you are to love the Lord your God with your heart, with your soul, and with your strength." So he talks about those three words that the people of God, in the Old Testament at least, were to love God with their heart, soul, and strength. It's interesting that in the Hebrew language, the word for heart actually is not only the emotional center for a person, but also meant intellect. It meant cognitive thinking. So in the book of Mark, in fact, I'm going to read this from my Bible here, in Mark chapter 12, verse 30, Jesus says this when he's asked, what's the greatest commandment? And it's a verse that many people know. And Jesus answers by actually echoing or reiterating most of Deuteronomy chapter 6, where he says, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul." Now, interesting, he adds another word here, with all your mind and with all your strength. I love that, because the mind is something that Jesus wanted the hearers of that day to know, that when it came to being the people of God, that they were to love the Lord their God with their heart, with their soul. Yes, they would have known that, but also their mind. And in the Greek language, and in the first century, the people listening to Jesus would not have known that the word heart in Hebrew actually captured both the emotion and also the intellectual capacity. So he makes sure that they know that they're to love God with their mind as well. So when it comes to people of faith, to be the people of God, is that God has given us the ability with our minds to use our knowledge, to use our cognitive thinking. And as you looked at last week of critical reading, that is when you research and when you engage with sources, you're to think and read with a critical eye. You're to ask questions about the author. Is this author reliable? Is this author trustworthy? Does this author use evidence, credible evidence, to support his or her claims? Also, as you read from research or from a source, is asking questions about the text itself. What does the text say? and beginning to ask questions about the language and the context and the arguments that are being presented. Looking for logical fallacies, that is, positions that just don't make sense or are illogical. That's the use of our mind, and that is something God has given you. And it's actually a way that you can love and serve God, is by the use of your minds. So as you journey through English 225R, know that as you're gaining these skills in critical reading and research and the use of your mind, know that you are reflecting who God is and you're honoring His name.